Hello, hello, hello. Thank you for joining TME Podcast. I am Miss Rhonda. I have a special guest this evening, Mr. Richard Capriola. Today we are going to talk about adolescent substance abuse. This is a very serious topic, and I'm very anxious to hear what Mr. Capriola has to tell us about this subject. Good evening. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Rhonda, for taking the time to talk to me and invite me to the program to talk about this important topic. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do so.
Yes. So let's get into this. So, adolescent substance abuse. So, this is not a topic that I am very educated on. And so, I'm looking forward to you giving me information that I do not know.
Well, I think many parents are in the same position that you are. They don't know much about this. This is a topic that I think many parents are afraid of, and when we're afraid of something, we tend to try and avoid it. But in this instance, I think that can be a very risky attitude, and because knowledge is power, and the more that we know about this topic, the better prepared we feel to deal with it if we have to.
Absolutely. So, can you tell me what are the drugs that our teens are actually taking today?
Well, most teenagers still gravitate towards alcohol and marijuana. Those are the two most popular drugs among teenagers, and that's been true for a long, long time. Teenagers gravitate towards alcohol and marijuana. There is some use of the more hardcore drugs, the prescription drugs like Ritalin and Adderall, some abuse of what we call the more hardcore drugs. But really, that's a very small percentage of teenagers that are into those drugs. Most teenagers tend to gravitate towards alcohol and marijuana. Now, nearly 1 in 3 high school seniors report using some type of an illicit drug, primarily marijuana. And about 30% of high school seniors report having been drunk. Um, Prior to the pandemic, what we'd noticed was a tremendous increase, a surge in teenagers that were vaping nicotine and marijuana. Vaping is where they'll take a substance like nicotine or marijuana and use an instrument to turn it into a vapor and inhale it. Well, for about 3 years prior to the pandemic, in 2021, teenage vaping was just increasing at alarming rates.
Right. So, clear this up for me. So, for the longest time, it was my understanding that vaping was safe and it was not addictive. But from what I'm seeing now, that's not true.
Yeah, that's not true because nicotine is a very powerful drug. Whether you're smoking cigarettes or cigars, or you're inhaling nicotine through a vaporizer, vaping it, it is a very addictive substance. And marijuana has the same potential to become habit forming. Um,
Yes.
and the danger is with teenagers particularly, their brains are vulnerable. Their brains are in the process of maturing and developing. Our brains don't become developed until around age 24 or 25. So for a teenager, particularly, using a substance like marijuana or nicotine runs the risk of doing some damage to that very vulnerable developing brain.
Okay. So, if we have a teenager or adolescent who is using drugs or alcohol, what should we be looking for to let us know if we are unaware that that's going on?
I think one of the best things that people can do, that parents can do, is know the warning signs. I treated many teenagers, for substance abuse, and when I would sit across from their families and I would give their family the history of their child using a substance, they would sometimes look across at me and they would say, "I had I had no idea this was going on. Or if they did suspect their child was using a substance, they might say, well, I sort of thought something was going on, but I didn't think it was this bad. And these are good parents. These are good parents doing the best that they can. They miss the warning signs because nobody told them what to look for. So, in my book, The Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse, I list the warning signs. I have warning signs for alcohol use. I have warning signs for a kid that might be smoking marijuana. I have warning signs for a child that might be developing an eating disorder or self harming themselves, because sometimes those can accompany a child using a substance. So, those warning signs are in the book. But as a general rule, what I suggest to parents is pay attention to the changes that you see in your child. You know your child better than anyone. So pay attention to some of these changes that you might be seeing. Don't assume that they're just normal teenage acting out behaviors. They may very well be that, but they might also be an indication that there's something else going on underneath the surface. So some examples would be a child whose grades are declining, a child who's getting into disciplinary problems at school or home, a child who used to enjoy participating in extracurricular activities no longer shows interest in those activities or wants to participate, a child that used to introduce you to their friends. You knew who their friends were. You might have even known who some of their family members were. Now becomes very secretive of who their friends are. A child who becomes very secretive about where they've been and what they've been doing. And then, of course, if you find any drug paraphernalia around the house or any strange orders, then I think those can be concerning too. So if some of these warning signs tend to come and go, they go come and go quickly, it's probably not too concerning. But if you notice that these signs are lingering on, they're lasting longer and longer, and then you start to see more of these warning signs, then I think it's time as a parent to maybe seek out some professional assessments and get some advice.
Can we go back for one moment? I know earlier you mentioned Ritalin, and that's a prescription drug. So, how often are our children being addicted to prescription drugs?
Well, again, it's not a very high percentage. It's probably less than 5% of teenagers that are abusing Ritalin and Adderall. Sometimes they will abuse their own prescription. They'll take more than what's prescribed, or they'll sell it to another kid. Or if they don't have a prescription, they might buy it from one of their friends. But parents need to just be aware that it's out there, that if you have any prescription medications, even over the counter medications in your home, you need to secure those, and alcohol too, so that teenagers don't have easy access to getting their hands on those substances if they want to.
That's a good point. I had a cousin years ago who told us that he had been drinking since middle school. He would take alcohol and put it into his thermos
Uh-huh.
and take his lunch to school, and like nobody knew until he was much, much older. And it's for that reason I didn't keep alcohol in my house when my children were younger at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, they're very clever. They know how to they know how to disguise and hide their use, and whether it's alcohol or a prescription drug, an over-counter drug, they if they have easy access, you run the risk of them getting into it.
Gotcha. Now, so what's the difference between the adolescent substance abuse and the adult substance abuse? So, if you are an adolescent using drugs, does that mean you're going to grow into an adult using drugs?
Not necessarily. Many adolescents will experiment with a substance like alcohol or marijuana. They may even compulsively, habitually use it. And then, by the time they leave high school or get into college and into adulthood, that phase has gone. Unfortunately, for some kids, not all kids, but for some kids, it escalates into more and more use, and it gets out of control, and in some cases, it might lead to them experimenting other drugs than what they use, say, in high school. So there's always the risk that when a teenager is abusing a substance, it could escalate into higher use, or it could move beyond that and get into more different kinds of drugs.
What's the correlation between, hold on, I just lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Mental health and drug abuse.
That's an excellent question because in some cases, and probably more than what we know, a teenager is using a substance to medicate an underlying emotional issue like anxiety or depression or some type of trauma, or maybe being bullied at school that the parents knew nothing about, or it's an emerging personality disorder. So in some cases, a teenager is using a substance to medicate an underlying psychological issue that unfortunately often gets unnoticed and often gets undiagnosed and treated. And that's why it's very important, if you discover that your child is using a substance, that you get a comprehensive assessment, not just a drug and alcohol assessment, but a psychological assessment, so that you can rule in or rule out whether or not there's an underlying issue that needs to be addressed. Now, many of the teenagers that I worked with who were smoking marijuana multiple times a day, when I asked them to help me understand why they were smoking so much marijuana, the number one answer that came back was, it helps me with my anxiety. So for some kids, they're using a substance like marijuana or alcohol to medicate that underlying psychological issue that they're struggling with. And if that's the case, that needs treatment as well.
Well, I guess my question is, and you may not know the answer, but for something such as anxiety, and although I know there are different levels of anxiety,
Uh-huh.
and when you consider a drug as marijuana, wouldn't that be milder than some of the prescription drugs they would give our kids?
Yeah, it can be, and kids who are using marijuana, say for anxiety, they're getting what they believe is relief from their anxiety, and it is helping. Other kids are taking prescription medicines for anxiety. They can be very effective too, but they're also prone to being abused. So, the bottom line is that kids are no different than adults. If we have an uncomfortable thought or feeling or memory, we're not going to sit with it. We want to get rid of it. And oftentimes, the way that we get rid of it is found in a substance, either through a prescription medication or an over the counter medication or an illicit drug.
Okay, now with you saying that, do you believe that a trauma can trigger drug use?
I think trauma, for some kids and some adults, is a very intense emotion that they seek sometimes, not always, but sometimes seek a substance to get the relief. So that when they're struggling with the trauma, they look for something to help give them the relief that they want, so that it's not such an intense struggle. And unfortunately, that relief sometimes comes in the form of a drug or alcohol.
Okay. I'm in Missouri. I know here in Missouri, I know that we have treatment centers and programs for teens and adolescents. Do you find that that's something that's going on pretty much all over?
There are many programs, local programs, that provide good treatment for adolescents who are struggling with some type of substance abuse or psychological issue. Unfortunately, there's not the resources to help every family have access to those programs. A lot of families don't have the financial resources, to send their child to these treatment programs, because they can be very expensive. A lot of families don't have the financial resources to send their child to outpatient treatment or inpatient treatment, and that can be really heartbreaking for families to know that your child is struggling and that you don't have the ability to be able to get them the treatment that they want. But there are other resources available. There's community mental health centers, there's a school system with counselors and psychologists, that are available for parents to get some help with.
Okay, that's very good information.
Good.
So before we close out, is there any other information that you think may be crucial for a parent to know if they're listening, or if there's a teen listening that may need help?
My message is a message of hope. I want parents to understand that if they have to go through this with their child, that there is hope. We know that treatment works. We know that they and their family and their children can get through this successfully. Uh, I think the best thing a parent can do is just become knowledgeable about this topic. That's why I wrote my book. I wanted parents to be knowledgeable about this. And I kept the book to about 100 pages because parents are busy. They don't have time to read volumes of information on this. So I kept it to about
Right.
100 pages. And my suggestion is learn as much as you can about this so that you feel less afraid and more prepared to deal with it if you have to. You hope you don't have to deal with it, but if you do, you want to feel prepared to deal with it.
Excellent. I think my last question, out of curiosity, how much of this could be hereditary?
Well, that's an interesting question also, because that we know with addiction, like any other disease, there is a genetic component to it. Probably 40 to 60% of a person's vulnerability to become addicted to anything is purely genetics. So if you have a history of alcoholism in your family or drug dependency in your family, what does it mean? It means that you're more at risk. That's true of any disease. So if there's a history of hypertension in your family, you're at risk for hypertension. If you're a woman and you have a history of breast cancer in your family, what does it mean? It means that you're at risk. If you have a history of cancer in your family, what does it mean? It means you're at risk. Doesn't mean you're going to get the disease. It just means that you're at risk. So I think it's important for families who do have that genetic history in their family to just understand that, it does place them and their children at a little bit higher risk. And when you know something is risky, you do the best you can to prepare and prevent it from happening.
That's excellent. That is excellent. Well, you have given us some excellent information.
Wow, thank
Can you
you.
go ahead and tell the audience once again the name of your book and where they can find it?
The name of the book is The Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse. It's available on Amazon as a Kindle and as a paperback. And you can go to the book's website, which is www.helptheaddictedchild.com, helptheaddictedchild.com. And you can read about the book. There's reviews and there's endorsements. And there's a link that'll take you right to Amazon, where if you'd like to purchase either the Kindle or the paperback, you can do that and keep it as a resource for you, or loan it out to another family that you think might find help with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for giving us some new knowledge and information. We very much appreciate you today.
Thank you, Rhonda. I appreciate you inviting me to the program and for participating in the discussion. Thank you so much.
You are very welcome. Thank you for joining TME Podcast, and you have a great rest of your day.